A rural girl begged for leftover food. Her rich boss secretly followed her. What he saw made him cry. Before we dive into this breathtaking story of overcoming obstacles, leave a comment below telling us which city and country you're watching us from. Stay tuned until the end. The invisible cleaning lady Lara would arrive before dawn at the Blake Tower building in Chicago, carrying with her accumulated fatigue and dreams stifled by reality. At 19, she had already learned to move without making noise, to clean without being seen, and to avoid eye contact with the wealthy residents. She was the cleaner of the hallways, the luxurious bathrooms, and the meeting rooms that she could never visit as a guest. Her outsourced badge made her invisible to everyone, except for the dust that insisted on returning. She lived with her blind grandmother, her sister in a wheelchair, and a constant sense of urgency. Lara lived in a rural community forgotten by politicians in the city. She had a firm gaze which hid the pain of a difficult life, and a determination that drove her to keep fighting, even when everything seemed to conspire against her. Her work was hard, but it was the only way she found to keep her family together and fed. The luxury building was a completely different world from the one she had grown up in. The people who walked by barely noticed her presence, and Lara liked that. She preferred invisibility to pity or awkward questions. She knew that her life was not looked upon favorably there, and that made her even more determined not to depend on anyone for her survival. Yet, Lara silently dreamed of something greater. Not wealth or status, but dignity and security for her family. She knew the road ahead was long, but she would not give up. With every sweep of the broom, with every mop of the floor, she harbored a silent hope that her story would one day be different. The tycoon's gaze. Jonathan Blake, CEO of Blake Enterprises, was 38 years old and known for his ruthless cool and discipline. The executive's rigid schedule barely allowed him any distractions until he first heard a comment about the country cleaner who worked in his building. Curious, he decided to observe her. What caught his attention was not her obvious poverty, but something in Lara's eyes, a mixture of strength and sadness that seemed to contradict her silence. He had never noticed the outsourced workers before. To Jonathan, the employees were pieces of the corporate puzzle without faces or stories. However, the insistent mention of that young woman awakened a restlessness that he could not explain. Jonathan's gaze followed Lara as she crossed the halls, always discreet, always with a closed expression. It was as if she carried a secret that no one else saw. Little by little, that curiosity turned into a silent obsession. He wanted to understand who this young woman was who awakened something unexpected within him. It was unusual for a businessman like Jonathan to care about a cleaning lady, but something about that girl challenged his concepts and his usual indifference. Without knowing it, he was about to dive into a universe that would change his life. Meanwhile, Lara went about her daily life without noticing the watchful eyes that followed her. For her, the world of the rich was an insurmountable barrier, and Jonathan, a distant stranger. However, destiny began to draw invisible lines between them, which would soon intertwine irreversibly. The bags of shame. Jonathan noticed that Lara, always at the end of her shift, would discreetly pick up bags from the building's industrial kitchen. No one seemed to notice, and she never said anything when questioned. It was a silent ritual that aroused his curiosity even more. He wondered what the reason for this hidden and silent action, so different from everything he knew, could be. Some employees whispered that perhaps she was selling food to earn extra income. Others said she must be starving. Jonathan preferred not to believe in easy judgments. He decided to take a closer look, trying to find out what was hidden behind those bags. It was as if Lara's story was hidden there, among the waste that no one else wanted. Her attitude was filled with shame, but also with an urgency that moved Jonathan in an unexpected way. Behind the discreet facade, he sensed a silent and desperate struggle. He felt that her gesture had a meaning much greater than simple hunger or misery. Every day, Lara's bags became a mystery to Jonathan that needed to be solved. The CEO, who never showed feelings, now found himself involved in a human plot that he never expected to face. The distrust of the powerful, convinced that something deeper was going on, Jonathan began to suspect that Lara might be using the bags to sell food and make illegal profits. For a businessman like him, every move had to be explained, and the suspicion grew like a silent shadow. He then decided to monitor the young woman's departure times, looking for some concrete evidence. He discreetly hired a team to follow Lara without her noticing. He watched her steps, her destinations, and her gestures with an attention that made him uncomfortable. Jonathan was determined to find out the truth, even if it meant invading the young woman's privacy. His controlling and suspicious side, combined with a growing curiosity, kept him vigilant. But as he monitored her, he began to realize that something about this investigation was starting to get to him. His initial distrust was giving way to a confused feeling, a mixture of pity, admiration, and even respect. Jonathan was beginning to understand that he couldn't judge Lara just by appearances or rumors he had heard. He did not know that deep down his search for the truth was about to confront his own convictions and reveal a reality he had never imagined he would know. The night escape. On a cold night, Lara left the building carrying her bags with the same discretion as always. The street was silent and the city lights created long, deep shadows. Jonathan, who followed her in the car, kept his distance, not making himself noticed. He felt a mixture of anxiety and concern, as if he were invading sacred territory. She walked quickly with firm steps, but the weight of those bags seemed more than physical. Lara carried the world on her shoulders, and every movement showed the urgency and care with which she hid her real life. Jonathan felt like an intruder, but he couldn't stop following. It was as if he were in front of a story that he needed to understand. At every turn he wondered what he would find at the end of that path. A hidden mystery, a secret that didn't want to be revealed, a silent pain that didn't fit in the luxurious corridors of the building. Jonathan had never felt so vulnerable and at the same time so moved by something beyond his control. He knew that night would change everything. What he would find in the rural community could destroy his certainties or open a new path for both of them. The other side of the city, Jonathan arrived at the rural community where Lara lived, a place forgotten by the progress and bright lights of the city. There, among simple houses and dirt streets, he saw her distributing food to elderly people who could barely stand up, children with sunken eyes from hunger and delicate care for her sister in a wheelchair, and her grandmother who could no longer see. Everything was silent, but full of life and suffering. He was shocked when he realized that this young woman he thought was invisible was carrying a much greater burden than he had ever imagined. The scene before his eyes dismantled his theories and awakened a compassion he did not know he had. Lara had not only survived, she was fighting with dignity and love in a daily battle that he would never face. Jonathan stood hidden, watching every gesture, every tired smile, every hidden tear. That sight changed his view of reality, of what poverty and strength meant. For the first time he felt that his world of power and control needed to open up to something more human. He knew that nothing would be the same again. That silence of the invisible had finally been broken, and a new chapter was beginning, both for Lara and for him, the silent CEO. After that night in the rural community, Jonathan could not find peace. His sleep was interrupted by vivid images of those children and elderly people who needed urgent help. The rigidity that he had always carried in his posture seemed to melt in the face of the reality that he now knew existed so close, yet so far from his corporate routine. He felt a weight on his chest, a mixture of guilt and helplessness that made him reflect on his own trajectory. Memories of his childhood, buried under years of striving for success, came flooding back. Jonathan knew what it was like to grow up with no prospects, facing poverty and abandonment. That forgotten experience began to surface in his mind, challenging the cold businessman everyone knew. He realized that his personal history had more in common with Lara than he had imagined. In the silence of his office, away from the eyes of his employees, Jonathan planned how to act. He didn't want to just feel sorry for them, but to do something concrete to change the situation for those who were invisible. He knew he would have to use his influence and resources for something bigger, but the first step would be to better understand the problem and how he could help without exposing those who depended on that help. But despite his rational decisions, he still felt an internal struggle. It was the mix of his painful past and his current responsibility that made him restless, as if he were facing a new challenge that no MBA could teach him how to solve. The company's reaction. In the following days, Jonathan requested detailed reports on the salaries and conditions of outsourced employees. He wanted to understand in depth how the company treated the workers who kept everything running, but who, for many, remained invisible. Without explaining it to anyone, he began to direct funds towards improving the infrastructure of the most vulnerable sectors. He also ordered a review of internal policies, especially regarding the food and health of workers. He determined that everyone should have access to decent meals and adequate medical care. The change was discreet but impactful, as it reflected a real concern for those who, until then, were just numbers in his reports. The HR team noticed the change in the CEO's behavior, but no one knew why. Jonathan avoided talking about the subject, preferring to act behind the scenes. His demeanor became that of a more attentive and present man, although he maintained his austere image. For him, this internal transformation was a silent process, still far from being shared. Meanwhile, Lara continued her difficult routine, unaware that her life was beginning to influence decisions at the top of Blake Enterprises. Jonathan was determined to build bridges between opposing worlds, driven by a growing need for social justice. The indifference of others. Lara faced not only the burden of poverty every day, but also the prejudice and silent bullying of her co-workers. Many avoided her, whispering nasty comments about her smell and humble origins. The young woman tried to ignore it, focusing on work and family, but the pain of the judgmental words and looks penetrated deep. Jonathan, in turn, was alerted by close employees about Lara's situation. He decided not to intervene directly, but he kept a discreet eye on everything. He knew that changes needed to come from within, and that respect needed to be earned through example and cultural transformation of the company. The CEO quietly implemented internal awareness campaigns, reinforcing values of inclusion and respect. He encouraged leaders to be more human and to recognize the value of each employee, regardless of their role. It was an initial step, but an essential one to break the cycle of exclusion that Lara and so many others faced. For Lara, however, the environment remained hostile, and she remained isolated, facing her challenges without support. Jonathan saw this and felt an even greater responsibility, knowing that real impact would require more than superficial changes. The unexpected invitation. One day, to Lara's surprise, Jonathan called her into his office for a meeting. She imagined the worst, fearing she would be fired or reprimanded for some mistake. But when she walked into that cool, sophisticated room, she realized something different was happening. The CEO wanted to hear her story, not to punish her, but to understand. The conversation was uncomfortable at first, as Lara was not used to having space to speak without judgment. But little by little, Jonathan listened attentively, with a genuine attention that surprised the young woman. He was not looking for ready answers, but wanted to know the truth behind that resistant and discreet look. Lara opened her heart, talking about the difficulties she faced, the loss of her parents, the responsibility for her sister and grandmother, and the constant struggle to provide the basics. Jonathan realized that she was not just an employee, but a strong and determined woman who carried the world on her shoulders. At the end of the meeting, something changed for both of them. Lara felt that she had finally been seen, and Jonathan understood that this meeting was the beginning of a journey of transformation, where true listening would be the first action of many. Lara told her story bluntly, revealing the tragedy that had marked her life. Her parents died in an accident, leaving her solely responsible for her sister Lily, who had a degenerative disease, and her grandmother Martha, who was gradually losing her sight. Every day was a struggle to get medicine, food, and basic care, without any help from the government or institutions. She explained that the reason for the bags in the industrial kitchen was not illegal trade, but an attempt to guarantee food for the family when the budget was too tight. Lara did this out of shame and fear of being discovered, because she knew that appearances could condemn her. She was a woman who carried the weight of survival for many. Jonathan listened to everything in silence, absorbing each word as if it were a gift that revealed an unknown reality to him. He felt a deep admiration for Lara, not only for her courage, but for the dignity she maintained even in the face of adversity. That story strengthened his conviction that he needed to act responsibly, respectfully, and sensitively. He didn't want to be just a CEO, but someone capable of making a real difference in the lives of invisible people like Lara and her family. Common wounds. Jonathan then shared his own story, something few people knew. He grew up in a poor neighborhood without a father present, facing abandonment and hardships that shaped his rigid and controlling character. He revealed that the distance between him and Lara was not as great as it seemed, and that the pain of childhood had similar marks. This moment of vulnerability brought the two closer together in an unexpected way. Lara, who had always felt alone in her struggle, found in Jonathan a mirror of her own wounds but also a possibility for change. They understood that their stories, although different in context, had in common the strength to survive. Jonathan felt he could trust Lara, and that her influence could be used to break cycles of exclusion and suffering. The mutual respect and empathy that grew between them created a solid foundation for the partnership that was beginning to form. The connection that emerged in that office symbolized something greater, human recognition that transcends classes and titles, paving the way for true transformation. A new look with Lara's help, Jonathan began visiting the rural community in disguise, avoiding revealing his identity. He brought food, medicine, and hired improvements for the village, always trying to act discreetly so as not to create dependency or humiliation. He wanted the support to be respectful and for the village to be able to rebuild with dignity. These visits changed Jonathan's perspective on reality. He began to understand that the problem was not just a lack of resources, but also social neglect and the invisibility of those living on the margins. Direct contact with people changed his view of the role of business in society. Lara became a key partner, introducing him to families, helping identify real needs, and ensuring that help reached those who truly needed it. The trust between them grew every day, creating a solid alliance between the corporate world and the simple life of the community. The transformation was just beginning, and the silence of the invisible was giving way to a movement of hope and social justice, driven by a CEO who had finally decided to listen and act. The village in motion, the village began to transform slowly, like an organism awakening from oblivion. With the discreet resources Jonathan sent, small improvements emerged. A new well, a makeshift community center, and basic medical supplies. Lara watched it all warily, still not sure who was behind the change. To her, it seemed like a silent miracle, an unexpected hope amid the harshness of everyday life. The support had a ripple effect. People began to come together, taking part in collective efforts to clean streets, cultivate community gardens, and care for the sick. The sense of belonging grew with each passing day, breaking the apathy that poverty often generates. Lara felt lighter in her heart, even in the face of the difficulties that continued to exist, because now there was a future possible. Jonathan followed each step forward, always in silence, but pleased with the impact that these actions had. For him, it was not just about philanthropy, but about justice, restoring dignity to those who had been forgotten by society. He knew that this was just the beginning of a longer and more challenging path, but he was willing to take each step alongside those he now recognized as family. As the village bustled, Lara could no longer ignore her growing curiosity about who was doing all this. Hope was no longer silent. It turned into questions and expectations, which drew closer to the name she both feared and admired: Jonathan Blake. The great discovery one unexpected day, Lara saw Jonathan in person in the village, delivering a blanket to a sick child. The scene took her by surprise, and the feeling of being watching something forbidden overcame her. She felt betrayed and vulnerable, but also an unexpected force drove her to confront him directly. This was her chance to understand once and for all the mystery behind the changes. Jonathan didn't shy away from the conversation. He honestly admitted that he was behind the help, that he wanted to make amends and change lives. He explained that his intention was never to expose anyone, but that he needed to act to stop the injustice. Lara listened intently, feeling a whirlwind of emotions: anger, relief, distrust, and gratitude all mixed together. The conversation was difficult, full of tense moments, but also of honesty that opened space for a new relationship between them. Lara realized that despite his flaws, Jonathan had taken a real step towards redemption. He was no longer just the distant boss, but someone willing to get personally involved in the causes that mattered. The revelation changed the dynamic between them. Lara gained new respect for the man who, despite being so different, shared a struggle for justice and dignity, and Jonathan understood that trust was the foundation for any true transformation. The truth hurts and heals. The confrontation did not erase the marks of mistrust, but it paved the way for healing. Lara was moved to see that Jonathan recognized his mistake in following her, and his humility in asking for forgiveness revealed a side that had been hidden until then. That moment became a turning point, where both understood that truth and vulnerability are essential to building something solid. Jonathan confessed that he learned more from Lara than from any course or training he had taken throughout his career. His worldview changed radically, and the power relations that had previously defined him gave way to a genuine commitment to equality and respect. He wanted to be not just the boss, but an ally. In turn, Lara felt that her individual struggle was transforming into a collective movement. From that moment on, she knew that she was not alone and that together, they could create a greater and lasting impact. The pain of the past remained, but hope was stronger and lit the way. The truth hurt, but it also healed, and it was in this process that they both found a reason to continue, overcoming fears, barriers, and prejudices to seek justice and redemption. The new project. Jonathan announced the creation of a social center in the village named after Lara's parents, as a way to honor her history and the memories she carried. The project brought together not only resources but also partners committed to providing education, health, and opportunities for the residents. Lara was invited to take on the role of social impact coordinator, a responsibility she accepted with pride and determination. The center was not just a symbol but a concrete tool for transformation. There, children had access to classes, health professionals provided basic care, and training programs created jobs for young people. The village, once forgotten, became an example of resilience and hope. Lara felt that her suffering had finally paid off. The job was not just a financial opportunity, but a mission that connected her to her deepest purpose, helping other invisible people find voice and dignity. Jonathan, by her side, was taking on his role as a leader committed to social justice. The project was the closing of a cycle and the beginning of a new stage, where collaboration and respect guided each step. A story that began in invisibility now shone with the light of redemption. Life has changed, but the heart remains. With the social center fully operational, the village was no longer the same. Hope blossomed on every face, and the future seemed more accessible. Lara continued to work hard, not only to support her family, but to ensure that other people had the same opportunities she was beginning to receive. Her journey of struggle and overcoming challenges inspired everyone around her. Jonathan, in turn, became a transformed man. His experience with Lara and the village changed his worldview and his way of leading. He became an active advocate for social justice inside and outside the company, fostering a culture of empathy and accountability. Financial success was no longer the only goal. Even though her life had changed, Lara still carried bags. But now, they were filled with dignity, hope, and pride. What had once been a source of shame had become a symbol of struggle and victory. The journey of the invisible became visible, impacting everyone who crossed their path. Lara and Jonathan's story shows that justice and redemption are possible when courage and empathy meet, and that behind the silence of the invisible, there is an immense force capable of transforming the world. If this story touched you and you want to follow more real stories of courage, justice, and transformation, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is an opportunity to learn about invisible lives that deserve to be seen and heard. Turn on the bell to receive all the news and be part of this community that believes in the power of empathy to change the world. Together we will transform realities and inspire real change. Subscribe now.